Now, this week, Stats SA revealed a rise in the number of people without jobs, with the unemployment rate rising to 27.6%. The economists tell us that the country is just not growing enough to create the badly needed jobs. But is there another way? More and more, as we find ourselves in an increasingly digitized world, reference is being made to the gig economy. What is all that about? We'll find out now what it means and how this can help in the fight against joblessness with Labour, Employment and Human Rights lawyer Sherisa Rajah. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I've heard this term gig economy a few times, and I've never really said to someone, sit me down and explain it to me. Let's start there. What is a gig economy?
So in a gig economy, what you have rather than employees are workers. These workers don't dedicate the whole of their time like you would in conventional employment. What they rather do is piece jobs, gigs. They can serve a number of corporates within their speciality. They can disrupt, but they're not beholden to one person. This then breaks the bounds of geography, so they can service a number of companies regardless of where they're based, time zones, etc. In the gig economy, coupled with that, you also have platform work, where you have platforms that pair a consumer with a service provider without any kind of middleman or traditional employer model.
So now, isn't this what a consultant has been doing all this time?
No, because in the age of the gig economy, particularly with the fourth industrial revolution, what you have are platforms doing this kind of pairing, such that they are able to provide a service on almost immediate turnaround times. If you think about Uber, I can call a cab right now to fetch me, and the most I'd wait is maybe 4 minutes before I get fetched, as opposed to calling a taxi service, them sending someone, etc.
All right, so I guess the lever then is the technology and the platforms that exist now that can, I suppose, leverage this new way. And I suppose one has to think that way because, you know, my generation, we were taught, get an education, get a job, and you stay there, and then you get a golden watch at the end of 30, 40 years, whatever it is. But that's different now.
So what you're seeing more and more is that young professionals coming out of university question this model where we serve decades of time to get a title as partner, director. You see it very often in law firms. And they're saying, no, I don't want to do that. Can't I come to service that client in a faster way and with a shorter turnaround on my tenure? So this notion that people will come to retire in the jobs they hold today is becoming more and more scarce.
All right, so I know that you've been abroad, you've been to Silicon Valley, the home of the tech world.
Yes.
What did you learn there that we need to start embracing in South Africa? Because we've got a massive problem. Young people are the most unemployed. What can we do? So
the first thing that struck me about Silicon Valley is the kind of ecosystem in which entrepreneurs thrive. As an employment lawyer by trade, we met with Google X, and at Google X, the host of the company, shared their insights of the kind of environment that creates a thriving entrepreneurship buzz. And what they said is they encourage people to have their own gigs. They encourage people to synergize more. This idea that you call for a lift and you get into one lift and D takes you to building this or floor this and separate working spaces. There's things like hot desks going on. There are communal kitchens. There's a buzz around how can we work together? How can we collaborate? And those kind of things create a boom of ideas. The idea that to retain the best skill, I have to pay the most, then I have to restrain that person, tie them to a long confidentiality. Those things do not exist in any of the boomers we saw in Silicon Valley. Quite apart from that, the ecosystem there supports entrepreneurship. They create communities. Their regulations are cognizant of the troubles that entrepreneurs face on an almost daily basis.
But you're almost asking us to really sort of change our way of thinking, because the labor unions are saying, people on short-term contracts, we want them permanent. There's this security issue. And what you're saying is we've got to throw all of that out and start to accept that jobs means moving around.
No. So the kind of workers or the kind of employees that unions are protecting are those that are identified as vulnerable in our law.
Right.
There are people that by and large are in sector-specific organizations protected under wage level agreements, and they must be protected.
Right.
And the reason for that is because now, as wearing my labor law hat, is they do not have the economic power to bargain collectively for better. Okay. The law identifies that people that earn above 205,000 Rand per annum, so above 17,000 Rand a month or thereabout, are better placed to say, you know, man, I'm not signing that restraint. You're joking. The people that we're targeting are professionals. Okay. Those people that if they lost their job tomorrow, they can go and become entrepreneurs. Right. And so they should, because they must create employment. Okay. They must create work for those who need it.
But we're also encouraging young people not to look for jobs, but to create them. And this is an opportunity for them as well, I guess.
Yeah.
And also even not professionals, but creatives are kind of in that gig way of thinking anyway.
Yeah. What you're finding is people between the ages of 27 and 35 are your biggest movers and shakers in this economy, and that we share, South Africans, in common with Silicon Valley, with India, etc. Because what you're seeing is these people are looking at ways to disrupt. They've served their articles in accounts or law, etc., and they're like, thank you for the training, I'm so grateful. Now I'm going to go and figure out a platform, a way to disrupt, and they're using digitization. To say that South Africa is completely behind the curve is wrong. We have Netflix, we have Uber, we have Taxify, we have Sweep South. In fact, Sweep South is a South African company, so kudos to us. What I found as a South African going to Silicon Valley is we don't celebrate our spirit of Ubuntu. Right. This ecosystem, we had it ingrained with us in 1994 when we fought for our freedom. We had a change in government. We've had our elections now with minimal disruption, if any. That means we have the infrastructure, we are ripe for investment, and we have people who are worth investing in. So what I would like to take away from my trip is appealing to corporates to say, how do we accelerate, how do we incubate, how do we make them viable and sustainable entities so that they can create work for those who need it.
All right, so get Mr. Employer around the idea that Peter and Sherisa may not be working for me all the time, but the skills that he has, I can draw on them from time to time as they spread them around the ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly right. The one concern, though, is that the way the South African middle class spends, a colleague on the trip said his concern is that the South African middle class is one paycheck away from bankruptcy. Yeah. So the urge would be to think more in a more entrepreneurial way, to be more bootstrapped in how we spend, so that we can invest in ourselves and ultimately in our country in so doing.
We're sort of doing it, but what do we need to do to really explode this kind of thinking and this way of being?
So the one thing is around what's currently here. And we must always work with what we currently have. What we currently have is a good, solid system. We have clever entrepreneurs. We have clever people coming out of university who are sadly first-generation educated. I myself am first-generation educated. We shouldn't be embarrassed about that. We should celebrate that. We need to empower them. And the first thing is to look to the existing accelerators, to encourage people to reallocate their CSI spend, their supplier development, their enterprise development spend, to see how we can use that money to accelerate even more what's already in our country. We don't want our South African entrepreneurs creating Delaware Corps and leaving us. We want them to grow with us as our democracy gets old within the 25 years and entrenches itself in better systems, particularly after our new election right now. The second thing would be to then say, what is our mindset around this? Change isn't bad. Change is different. That means, do we regulate digital platforms, or do we find ways to protect vulnerable people and create more entrepreneurship? Platform work. We need to look, corporates can look gladly at how they can create platform work to gig some of their non-core functions, thus creating gig work for entrepreneurs in our country.
Sherisa, it's been a pleasure talking to you, but I've got a feeling these are conversations we're going to have to continue and start just thinking a little bit differently about how we do things. Thanks so much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us.